So it seems that we've got some massive Eldar leaks and confirmations. Certain datasheets are removed, including Karandras. Wraith Knights are going to be getting 2 profiles, one with the Ghostglaive. Let's find out what Farseers do in the new Codex, and the vastly rewritten Phoenix Lord datasheets, some of which, like Azamon, are going to be absolutely shredding infantry. Time to talk through some huge Codex Aeldari leaks. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we're talking Aeldari once more, and in this video I thought we'd round up the vast amount of leaks that have just hit the internet, and it does look like the Space Elves are in for a fairly monumental amount of changes in their codex, far more than most of the 10th edition ones so far. As we know, the big Aeldari release is coming this weekend. Space Elf collectors getting their codex with 8 different ways to play in it, plus some of the much needed to be updated Phoenix Lord and Aspect Warriors, all of which are launching on Saturday morning. As ever, if you did want to support the channel, the affiliate discount links are down in the video description below, thanks to those who pick up Warhammer things through them from time to time. And these are the times around the world when the new pre-orders are going live. Jumping into it though, and it seems that we've got a fairly wide array of Eldar leaks, seemingly coming from a bunch of different sources. I mentioned these briefly when I did the datasheet review for the new Phoenix Lord Lhykhis in the last video, but from this one I'm going to try and round up the biggest changes from the rest. The leaks have come from a few different ones. There's a fair few datasheet cards that have been leaked, and then like 2 pictures of the codex, one of which is the contents page which tells us the units staying and going, plus a few more datasheets there including some of the Phoenix Lords, and there's also been a few text described leaks as well, which look like they're legitimate given that every single one of the things that they say that's actually revealed in the picture does fit 1-to-1. So it makes it quite likely that the rest of the things are on the money as well. These have been shared in various different places around the internet now, but again a big shout out to the folks of the Eldar Discord server putting it all together in real time. Getting into it though, and let's start out with the datasheets that are staying and going. It looks like there's 5 different models that aren't going to be receiving a datasheets that had one before, and those are the Phoenix Lord Karandras, the Autarch Skyrunner, Illic Nightspear, Prince Iriel of Iyanden, and also the Warlock Skyrunner Conclave. Karandras I think is maybe one of the saddest losses there. The Phoenix Lord of the Striking Scorpions. Seems really weird that Games Workshop would add in the new Warp Spider one, but then forget to do one of the old ones. It just seems very unlikely that they haven't redone him, and I suspect that he's being held back for a future release, either end of edition campaign or maybe 11th edition codex. I don't really see why they couldn't have let us keep the datasheet in the meantime though. The Autarch Skyrunner is a kit that's been gone for a while as it was an older resin kit. Maybe wasn't too surprising and Games Workshop had hinted it. Illic Nightspear is a minor character, but maybe a shame to lose some Tabletop representation. It doesn't look like they've put any Blackstone Fortress Amalyn Shadow Guide in his place. Prince Iriel is again a really big character and kind of sad to lose him. Again, he seems perfect for an individual character release at some point in the future. And then the Warlock Skyrunners, you can still field them as regular ones, and you can still do on foot conclaves. It's just the Jetbite Warlocks you can't field in units of multiple now, and I guess there is only one model for them. Otherwise, the Ynnari look like they've actually lost a few datasheets. I'll cycle back to them. It seems that the only ones they're going to be able to access are the ones that are printed in the book, and at the moment it implies that you can't use Scourges, Hellions, Ravagers, or Lilith Hesperax, at least unless there's anything to save them from the actual Ynnari detachment, as they're not in the codex like the rest of the Drukhari things. It's not really a codex thing as well, but the Forge World Imperial armor datasheets will likely be going to Legends in the near future besides the massive Titan ones, and that'll be sad for a few people losing certain things like Shadow Spectres, Hornets, and some of the other fancy Grav Tank variants. As ever, never the best feeling when Games Workshop retires datasheets, particularly really quite big characters in the lore like Karandras or Prince Iriel. But given the way that Games Workshop operates, I really wouldn't be too surprised if they're back in the future, maybe next edition or so. On the flip side, the Codex has gained a few datasheets. We've got the rather spectacular new miniature for Lhykhis the Whispering Web, the new Phoenix Lord for the Warp Spiders, and it looks like she's got some really cool datasheet rules. But then otherwise for the main Craft World section, we've got a couple of split datasheets as well. The support weapon battery is divided in 3, becoming the D-Cannon, Shadow Weaver and Vibro Cannons, so they can all have their special rules and points costs. That does seem sensible, as the other 2 were basically paying the price for the D-Cannon existing. And then in a similar vein, the Wraith Knight now has 2 different options as well, the Ghostglaive one and the ranged one with the heavy Wraith Cannons. And that's pretty cool. It means that we might actually see some Ghostglaive ones on the board now. Those are the main ones gained, so I guess another 6 there, even if it's only one new model. And then of course the Ynnari Drukhari ones are included in the Codex too. I'll get onto them in a second. Just before them though, there have been some keywords that have changed around. It looks like the main faction keyword is no longer Aeldari, but instead Azayani. And generally that's the Eldar style word that refers to the Craft World Eldar as opposed to the more general Space Elves in 40k. They've moved Aeldari just to be a regular keyword, so it's still on all their datasheets, but that's the one that will also be shared with the Harlequins and the Drukhari, who also have that keyword in their things. Otherwise, another fairly common one is that the Aspect Warrior keyword has been gained by all the Phoenix Lords and the Aspect Warriors, as you'd expect. That's the one that allows them to interact with their Aspect Host attachment. It does mean that the Phoenix Lords will be able to get the buffs even if they're not in the squads. And a few other models have had keywords changed around. A couple of the Phoenix Lords have gained grenades with their new models. For the Ynnari though, with 40k sort of allied style factions like this, they'll often change the rules for them just about literally every edition. And this time around they've decided to include the Drukhari datasheets that you can field alongside the Craftworld Eldar ones, and they're reprinted in the Codex with names like Ynnari Archon or Ynnari Witches, to differentiate them from the ones in the Drukhari Codex. As mentioned though, the datasheet list is kind of thin and it takes out a few of their specialist options. The only ones that the Ynnari can field now, it seems, barring any sort of weird special rules in the detachment, are the Archon and Succubus, Cavalite Warriors and Witches, Incubi, Reavers, and Raiders and Venoms to transport some of the troops. Unfortunately, that does leave a whole load of things out that you could have fielded before, things like Hellions, the Drukhari Flyers, Lilith Hesperax, who I believe had lore working with the Ynnari in the past, Scourges and Mandrakes I'm sure will both be missed, as they both tended to be fairly big staples in Ynnari armies. If that is the case and there's no more context to it, could certainly be very annoying for Ynnari players, potentially having a bunch of units they can't even field alongside their craft worlds now. Otherwise, keywords-wise, the Ynnari units have the Ynnari faction keyword. That's in place of the Azayani one, which it replaces, but it still looks like they have battle focus listed on their datasheet abilities, so presumably they'll still be able to access that in some fashion, maybe in the Ynnari detachment. And they also have a faction rule called Disparate Paths listed on their datasheets. I wouldn't be too surprised if maybe that turns out to be more of an army construction style rule. Finally, in terms of locking out other things, Ynnari units are now only usable if no other epic heroes aside from the Ynnari ones are used. So if you say take Yvraine or the Yncarne, you can't take the Avatar of Cain, the Phoenix Lords, or Eldrad Ulthran. I think they were already locked out of taking the Phoenix Lords and the Solitaire, so maybe doesn't change things massively, I think beyond Eldrad, unless I'm missing some combos. Feel free to let me know in the comments if I am. In any case, certainly seems a massive shake-up for the Ynnari. Hopefully their detachment will be a good one, and when the dust settles they're very playable, and maybe with a little bit more flavour than before given unique stratagems and enhancements and stuff. Before we move on, I'll just give a quick shout out to the sponsor of today's video in Tabletop Stronghold, one of the many transport options available to get your Aeldari or other armies from one place to another in safety, and are basically an option for magnetic transport cases, the idea being that you put magnets on the bases of your models and they're attached to a metal sheet so they don't go sliding around when in transit, and you don't need to worry about fragile slender bits being cushioned properly or snagging on foam cases. Their offering for transport solutions are these mag cases, basically a big box made of notably sturdy MDF, with a whole load of ridges in them made to fit the steel trays that they come with, so you can adjust the height of them and the layers of models that you're transporting. It means that you can tailor them to different collections or army sizes. They've got quite a nice acrylic display sheet out the front as well, which is a positive compared with some, so you can see what's being transported. Broadly speaking, I've heard a lot of good things from people who have picked one of them up, maybe downsides being a little bit heavier due to the MDF construction, but in general tend to do the job well. In any case, feel free to check them out, there'll be links down in the video description. They've got a winter sale on at the moment for 25% off, that'll be lasting until sometime in early February, and shipping's free to much of the world, though certain places might be hit by import duties. If you're interested in any of their things, I'll cycle back to them at the end of the video to briefly talk through the boxes on offer. In any case, thanks to them for sponsoring this one. Getting back to the Space Elf goodness though, and one other common theme that's in the Codex are the Monofilament Weapons for the Warp Spiders and the Night Spinner and things. It seems that they've been shifted from having devastating wounds to just being AP-1 now. The Death Spinners are the Warp Spiders, and the new Lhykhis model, they all have AP-1 and ignores cover. The Night Spinner with its barrage clouds of monofilament death, that doesn't get ignore cover and just gets the AP-1. I'd say for the Warp Spiders who gained ignores cover as well, it's maybe more of a side grade. It makes them fairly solidly better at killing light to medium infantry. They're not quite as good against tough stuff that say had 2+ saves and high toughness values. I don't think it's the end of the world for them, particularly in the context of the Exarch gear that they gained. Looking at a few specific datasheets next, and one that I was perhaps particularly interested in was the Farseer, which seemed like a big question mark given that they're losing the Strands of Fate, so it would have to have a new datasheet ability altogether. It looks like the standard on-foot Farseer has both lost the Fate Dice manipulation and also the -1 to wound, instead having its psychic power being Guide, and keeping a rule that sort of keeps the spirit of the Fate Dice but in a very different way, and I'd say not as good. The Guide psychic power targets one enemy unit that you can see within 18 inches, and then all the rest of your Aeldari units can be +1 to hit that unit. I guess in theory that's a 25% damage buff for uncomplicated weapons without sustained or lethal hits, but maybe a little bit clunkier to use given that you actually need to expose the Farseer to the unit that you're trying to destroy, and you can't just sit next to the unit that you want to buff. We don't know if a defensive buff might be elsewhere in the Codex, maybe moved to the Skyrunner at this point, but that big -1 to wound buff was a really good one for things like avatars or other big tough stuff, and that will certainly be missed if it is indeed gone. Branching Fates has a similar idea to the Fate dice, but now it's basically locked to the Farseer's lead unit, so Guardians, once per phase you can change one dice to hit, wound or damage to suddenly become an unmodified 6, though it can't affect support weapon models, which is the ones you'd really want to use it on, as punching through some automatic 6 damage results with that would probably be the biggest value. I guess otherwise beyond that it might be the Storm Guardian fusion guns that could get the most benefit, but it still doesn't seem ideal compared with being able to put the buff on other units nearby. Weirdly on the datasheet it doesn't say that you can lead Warlock conclaves. I don't know if that might just be a typo given that Eldrad still can. It's now the Farseer that has the rule to be able to attach to a datasheet that also has a Warlock in the unit, so it looks like it's Farseers working with Warlocks and not Warlocks that can also join along with Autarchs anymore. I guess we don't know that 100%, the Autarch could have a similar rule on their datasheet I suppose. In any case, overall I'd say that this makes the Farseer less interesting, hopefully comes with a points drop. Otherwise, for Eldrad Ulthran, he previously generated a few more Fate dice for you, but now that's gone he's been swapped to command point duties. It looks like he's got the previous Autarch rule, generating you a free command point at the start of the command phase while he's on the battlefield. I'd guess maybe as a result the Autarchs might be getting the sort of Captain -1 discounted stratagem rule. That feels kind of appropriate compared with their peers in 40k, though I think it maybe means that Eldrad might just be extra more interesting compared with what he was before. Otherwise his version of Doom has been improved. It still gives you the focal +1 to wound targeted at an enemy unit, but now you no longer fail on a roll of 1, and it lasts until the start of your next command phase, so it might have some effect in the enemy turn as well if you get to attack them somehow. I feel like the command point thing will make him a fair bit more usable, but still might be in a slightly awkward spot if he's running alongside Guardians and needing to expose himself to get Doom on the go, as I think it's unlikely he's going to justify himself for command point generation alone. Next up, Shuriken Cannons appear to have had a change as from the Night Spinner datasheets. Looks like the one recorded there is swapped from a sustained hits 1 to lethal hits. Kind of interesting to see that change. It looks like the basic Shuriken catapults haven't changed at all, and they're still the same assault keyword without lethal hits. Maybe they're trying to make it just feel a bit more punchy but fewer shots, and maybe further differentiated away from the scatter laser with its spammed shooting, as this will mean that the Shuriken Cannon can just punch up just that tiny bit more and contribute against tougher things in the army that won't be quite as efficient at killing things like Space Marines. Either way, it's not the biggest change in the world though. Next up, we've got a few datasheets for the new Phoenix Lords. Asmund I think is still looking really interesting, having a few changes for better and some for worse. In melee he still hits hard with 6 attacks at strength 6, AP 3 and damage 3 with devastating wounds, though his paired Shuriken catapults, the Bloody Twins, they've gained 1 pip in strength but lost lethal hits, so a trade off there. I guess you could still gain lethal hits back in the aspect host with a stratagem. They'll still be better overall against anything that was toughness 4 or 5. Otherwise, basically he's had the rest of his unique stuff just replaced wholesale. Phoenix Lords in general don't give you +1 to hit for the lead unit anymore. I guess maybe that's so guides can still affect their units. And he also doesn't have his 3+ invulnerable save, that's gone, and he doesn't give free overwatch either. In place of all those, he's got Tactical Acumen, which is a pretty nasty move shoot move one. While leading a unit, he can make a normal move of 6 inches after shooting, so that means that your Dire Avengers could spring out of cover, shoot something, and then fade away to somewhere safe. Exactly what they want to do, given that they can often be buffed up to hit quite hard, but then don't really want to stick around for the enemy to shoot them back as they're not that tough. Feels like just another unit that could be really hard to catch up with all the battle-focused shenanigans and trying to hide units after they've struck. It doesn't say anything about transport vehicles there, and usually if you make a normal move then you can embark on one once again. I think by the core rules you're only restricted to within the phase, so it sounds like you might be able to disembark from a transport and then re-embark again with that rule, which feels like the sort of thing that Games Workshop might decide to fix if that's true. Otherwise, his Hand of Asian rule is a once per game personal damage buff. Once per battle, the Bloody Twins gain damage 3, anti-infantry 3+, and devastating wounds. Pretty scary stuff when you're hitting with 6 attacks on a 2+. Looks like he could put down multiple Terminators like that. That's a pretty insanely threatening unit against elite infantry. Overall, between the damage thing and the move shoot move, Asmund's looking really nice with Dire Avengers, at least from what we know so far. Next up we've got Baharoth, whose core stats have stayed the same. He still gets his boosted Hawk's Talon and 6 attacks at strength 5, damage 2 in melee. As Games Workshop had teased before, he gets the Cloud Strider rule that allows him to jump on and off the board now, returning to strategic reserve at the end of the turn if not in engagement range, and also on top of that he allows his units to deep strike at 3 inches, which will be toned down to 6 inches as per the balanced data slate. Jumping on and off the board tends to be pretty powerful if you can do so, though with a big 14 inches they can often get to where they need to be anyway. The 6-inch deep strike definitely makes that a little bit more interesting, and he also has a damage rule as well, called Cry of the Wind, which in some way boosts critical hits when the unit's set up on the battlefield, but the exact details of that are cut off. It'll mean that they'd have a few more lethal hits when they're coming down, but we don't know how much or who it applies to. In any case, I must admit, I do really quite like the new model for this guy. Next up, we've got Fugan, the Burning Lance of the Fire Dragons. His new stat line does appear to be similar to the one that came out in the packaging leak that came with him. Both profiles of his gun have Assault now, not just the beam version of it. The beam version has gained Melter 1 and has swapped Sustained Hits D3 for Sustained 2. Otherwise, for his buff for Fire Dragons, he has swapped the +1 to hit for a +6 inches threat range to Melter Weapons, and that's going to make it way more easy for Fire Dragons to get into Melter range with those big hitting fusion guns. He still has his Revive on Death rule, which saw him getting used individually quite a bit in some Eldar lists. It's lost his Feel No Pain though, which means he's not quite as tanky to take out as he was before, and he has gained some grenades to throw at the enemy if it makes sense. Overall, he's still very big and threatening with a bunch of direct damage. I don't think he'll be used in quite the same way as he was before though, if Battle Host rerolls aren't being used in quite the same way, and he doesn't have Fate dice to throw into automatic Overwatch. Alongside a bunch of the more confirmed datasheet leaks, there were also a bunch of text leaks. These definitely aren't quite as confirmed as the rest, but at the same time all the changes that they talked about for the units that have just gone over did fit in with the actual confirmed datasheets, so it makes it pretty likely that the rest are accurate. Swooping Hawks apparently will each deal a mortal wound when they move over an enemy unit, rolling a 4+ for each model in the squad. That fits with exactly what Games Workshop said they'd do, and that's a fairly common rule as 40k goes at the moment. Definitely a change in their unit role though, no longer being able to bound on and off the board without Balroth around. Fire Dragons, as Games Workshop said, apparently do get full unrestricted hit, wound and damage rerolls against monsters and tanks. It sounds like these guys are going to be absolutely monstrous, particularly with any other detachment buffs they might be able to pick up on top of that. The Exarch's going to gain some new equipment options as well. Apparently the new axe that he gets can be damage D6 if you take that, though I feel like the fire pike will be tempting. And one of the leaks said that the fusion guns might well be going to 18-inch range, though I don't know if they might just have been referring to the Fugan boost there. We'll see if that happens or not, but if so, that'll be 24-inch range Fire Dragons, which sounds absolutely terrifying for any monster or vehicles around. If they really are getting that little lot, I wouldn't be too surprised to see points go up. Otherwise, apparently the Falcon Grav tank still grants reroll wounds as before as its datasheet rule. Wraithguard are supposed to swap their datasheet rule for fallback and shoot, which I guess doesn't hurt to keep them firing. The Wraith units will now get +1 to hit if they're within 12 inches of a Psyker, which I think would be a nice touch and not just make them completely dependent on the Spirits here actually joining the unit. And then Games Workshop themselves said that they'd get the Army Rule Battle Focus if they're joined by a Spirit Seer, so it might give them some other interesting movement opportunities. Finally, and one of the other intriguing things, there was a bit of a garbled sentence, but it sounded like they were implying that the Void Weaver might gain Lone Operative, and that'd make it kind of similar to the Tau Ghost Kill, a really annoying fire support unit that might have some big guns and he can't catch up with. Though if that was the case, I suspect it will be charged at a massive points premium like the Ghost Kill is, and really wouldn't be a very efficient damage dealer for its cost at all to compensate for the fact that it can basically shoot things with impunity. It certainly would feel all very Eldar though. The Codex so far seems to be pretty filled with options to be able to hide things after they've shot, or prevent enemies from dealing damage in return. Otherwise, we had a couple of datasheet reveals for the Ynnari. Yvraine and the Yncarne both had some fairly similar stat lines, though again really quite a lot of changes to their special rules. Yvraine lost the ability to lead Harlequin troops, but can lead Incubi. That's a bit of a downside, as Harlequin troops were the ones that she was most tempted to lead before, though I guess given her new special rule with re-rolling wound rolls in close combat, that would be a seriously nice buff to give to the Incubi with their claves. Otherwise, for her defensive rules, she's lost the 5+ Feel No Pain that she gives to the unit, so her squad isn't going to be unusually tanky anymore. So if the squad can happen to be injured but not fully destroyed, she'll restore D3+1 models to the unit, and again if that could be things like Drukhari Incubi, then that's quite a big deal, as they're fairly valuable models. Otherwise she lost Deep Strike, which I kind of wonder if it was a typo in the first place, and like the rest of the Ynnari characters you can only field them if you don't include any other epic heroes aside from the Ynnari ones, so no being in an army list with say the Avatar of Cain, the Phoenix Lords or Eldrad. Otherwise, broadly it feels like the Yncarne was slightly nerfed in terms of abilities. Inevitable Death now only works in your opponent's turn, and you can only teleport to the site of one of your own friendly destroyer units, as opposed to being able to potentially teleport during your own turn and choose friend or foe in either of them. That definitely shuts down a lot of its movement shenanigans, though it's still kind of spooky that whenever the opponent actually destroys one of your units, this thing might pop up. It definitely still has some interesting potential. Otherwise, in a massive nerf to its stats, it's lost its half damage rule, so it's going to be a lot easier to take off the table than it was, and instead of that we'll have a rule where it heals a bit if it kills a unit, healing D3 wounds there, which might not always trigger all that often and just isn't really great, even if it's not unhelpful. Still though, doesn't mean that it's not necessarily even stronger than before. I guess these will come with points decreases, and it's a whopping great big 350 right now. It's definitely got lots of room to come down in points really quite drastically given those changes. One of the last datasheets that was leaked was the Night Spinner, and this one might be an interesting teaser for Guardian leadership characteristics. Previously Aeldari were 6+ across the board, though given that this guy was a 6+ and it's gone up to a 7, that kind of implies that the other Guardian style units will have done so as well. This was the only one of the non-aspect and non-seer units that was leaked, so at the moment we can't really confirm that, but I think that kind of makes sense really, given that they're citizen soldiers, even if they're incredibly skilled ones. Perhaps not the worst idea to try and keep Battle Shock as relevant as possible. Otherwise it seems like the Night Spinner has had a datasheet nerf that maybe wasn't too unexpected given the changes that we saw for the guard. Its big monofilament gun now only gives you -2 to the move characteristic and -2 to charge rolls, kind of similar to what the Siege Regiment and the Basilisk got. Again, maybe could afford to come down in points if the movement debuff isn't quite that godly, and it's no longer got devastating wounds that you can feed 6s into. It feels to me that there's a lot of room for this to drop in points by quite a bit now. Finally, I did a dedicated video talking about the Warp Spiders and Lhykhis in the last one, so feel free to check that out if you want to see a bit more detail on them. The brief version is though that Warp Spiders have got a whole bunch of different Exarch gear, plenty of fun profiles. If you go full melee, then they've got 10 attacks with the Power Blade array, all at strength 4, AP 2, twin linked and lethal hits, which is pretty well rounded, and can take some interesting combinations of ranged weapons as well, such as a Spinneret rifle which is basically a boosted Death Spinner, also paired with Death Weavers which are a twin linked version. The regular Death Spinners, as mentioned, get ignored cover and AP 1 rather than devastating wounds. Their Aspect Shrine can be used to flip a single dice to an unmodified 6 once per game, which is fun, and their Flicker Jump rule became a little bit more perilous, rolling 1d6 for each model in the unit and taking a mortal wound for each one, which does mean that it's going to stack up the casualties when you use that, as opposed to likely not doing so before. They're still looking like a really interesting unit, though coming with a bit more risk. Finally, again better covered in the last video, but Lhykhis the Whispering Web will often be leading these Warp Spiders into battle. She's got the standard Phoenix Lord stat line, but moving fast like the spiders, she gets a bunch of strength 6 and damage 2 attacks with lethal hits, plus backed up by some extra hits with the spider's fangs, and a big punchy twin linked Death Spinner with strength 6 and AP -2, which is all very nasty. Her special rules are both rather godly though. Empiric Ambush means that you can charge in a turn in which you flicker jumped, so a casual 24 inches, then shoot and charge. That's a pretty godly positioning advantage to be able to get the jump on something that really doesn't want to be hit first. And then also her debuff ability is really nice as well. Shoot one unit, and for the rest of the turn, all Aeldari units can critical hit on 5 against that. It can buff her own close combat for lethal hits if she charges in later in the turn, but seems like it could be absolutely monstrous in combination with that Aspect Host stratagem, giving your unit of Fire Dragons or Dire Avengers or Dark Reapers or something both sustained and lethal hits, so just utterly chewing up an enemy target that's marked by her. Overall seems like some incredibly powerful datasheet rules, unless they make her points cost ridiculous. She's got the potential to be a really strong option. In any case, that's the vast majority of the recent Eldar leaks. I'll be looking forward to seeing more details, whether it's from Games Workshop's previews or the rest of the Codex coming to light, and I'll certainly do a full Codex review once it's out. It's going to be interesting to put it all together in context of the new detachments. Finally, I'll just cycle back to Tabletop Stronghold. As mentioned earlier, one option out there for some quality magnetic carry cases. Here's just a rough idea for the amount of miniatures that you can fit in one of their boxes, around about 90 Guardsman equivalents, 50 odd Space Marine style things, or 30 Terminator equivalents in each layer of the tray. You can fit quite a lot on each level. For their box sets they've got on offer, they've got 3 different styles of mag case. This mini one is currently on sale for £72, $75 or €85, plus any VAT or import duties. This one's a more sort of skirmish style case. They can definitely fit some big chunky things in there. There's a Sicaran and Spartan on the ground floor there, plus a bunch of Terminators above them. The more standard size army case though is the regular mag case. This one's £114, $120 or €135. They come with a whole bunch of magnets to mount on the model's bases, and I'll leave the dimensions of the boxes on the screen. This one's quite a tall one and you can fit a whole Chaos Knight on the ground floor. Finally, their really big one is this XL version, basically 2 of the previous attached together at the prices shown. This one's a bit pricier given that it's the one that comes with a whole bunch of extra magnetic trays in it, I should be able to fit a pretty ridiculous amount of stuff in there. In any case, a big thank you to Tabletop Stronghold for sponsoring this one. Feel free to check them out, links down in the video description. I'll leave this one there for now though. Feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics if you'd like to see more like this. I'll certainly keep the regular 40k videos coming. If you'd like to support the channel, feel free to check out the Patreon page or any of the discount links in the video description. A big thank you to anyone who is. Otherwise, I'll see you for another video. Sounds like we're going to be talking about some Ynnari and Harlequins tomorrow, so I look forward to that. In any case though, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.